everyone. So I'll be speaking today around supporting lung cancer with nutrition. So I'll just go over a brief little outline of what we're going to chat about today. So I'll provide a little introduction to Inspire Health, which is where I work as a dietitian. And then we'll dive into the nutrition. So we'll talk about the importance of nutrition. We'll overview some nutrition fundamentals, chat through different considerations that can impact our nutrition. And then we'll look at nutrition during treatment, after treatment, and then how do we put this all together. So a little bit about Inspire Health. So we're a not-for-profit charity. We were founded in 1997, and we offer classes and programs completely free of charge. We receive partial funding from the Ministry of Health, as well as we rely on generous donations from the community, as well as key fundraisers throughout the year, which allows us to provide all of our classes and programs. And so there's no referral required for our services, and again, free of charge. And then we offer our programs and services at 3 different physical locations, so Vancouver, Victoria, and Kelowna. And we also offer a number of programs online. So all of our services are available online as well, which has been really wonderful for expanding our reach across BC to a lot of places that maybe people wouldn't have been able to access our locations previously. So group programming's online, our one-on-one services are online, as well as then the option for those in person at our 3 centers. So our team at Inspire Health is we have a full team of care physicians, counselors, registered dietitians, exercise therapists, all part of that interdisciplinary team supporting the patient, and then our care coordinators as well, who are kind of that first line of contact. And so we offer guidance and support for people with cancer or those at high genetic risk. And then all of our programs and services really emphasize an evidence-based lifestyle approach. All right, so we'll dive into the nutrition piece now. So I always like to start off with this slide of nutrition is a complex science. And everybody is different, and many patients have different circumstances that can affect nutrition recommendations. And so we'll be providing a lot of different information today, but really important to take in personalizing the information and considerations that really tailor the information to yourself. And just as some examples that can impact nutrition recommendations, so different side effects, different medications that people might be on, different treatments, where someone's at in terms of preparing for a surgery or post-op, different health history, different digestion and bowel health. So there's just so many different factors that really just emphasize how important it is that we have tailored sort of information, and there may be different nutrition recommendations for different people. And so this is where working one-on-one with a dietitian can be really supportive to really chat through a lot of that information and make sure it's tailored appropriately for yourself. So in terms of what we'll chat about today, so starting off with the importance of nutrition. I think we all recognize the importance, which is probably why we're here today. But the nutrition, the food we eat gives our bodies the energy and the raw materials to work with, and plays a number of roles from a prevention standpoint, lowering that risk of various chronic diseases, or maybe leading up to a surgery or treatment. Our nutrition plays a really big role in optimizing our nutrition status. During treatment, there can be different symptoms and side effects, and so nutrition can play a really big role in helping to support those and mitigate some of those effects. Can also help with our immune system support, recovery and healing, support with medication side effects, especially some medications that might be longer term, and then having these side effects come up over a longer term, and nutrition can play a really supportive role there. And then, of course, at all points, can help with improving quality of life and also that joy and connection piece that food can help bring. So looking at the nutrition fundamentals to start, and so no single food or food component can protect against cancer by itself. And so in terms of most healthful and safe approach, really looking at this whole foods diet where these foods are in their whole form, maintaining that nutrient density as that foundation, along with plant-based as a foundation. And you'll notice that based here is in bold, because I know there can be a lot of different terms for different dietary approaches these days, and plant-based is referring to plants as a foundation. So it's not saying a vegan or vegetarian. It's just how do we have a lot of plant foods as our foundation? And so this really can help shift to thinking about, well, what can we add in to our diet and to our food rather than thinking about what we need to take out. And then also just like to mention this note about more isn't necessarily always better, and really encourage variety and moderation, and just including a diverse range of foods. So we'll start off with these key nutrients. So we have our macronutrients and our micronutrients. And so macronutrients are kind of this bigger picture. They're nutrients that we need in really large amounts. And so these include things like protein, carbohydrates, fats, and these provide the energy and the building blocks for the different functions in our body. And important to note that these needs can change, especially during times of treatment. And so maybe our protein needs have increased, maybe our overall energy needs have increased. And so these macronutrients can really contribute to these in larger quantities, but they can shift depending on where somebody's at. And then we have our micronutrients, which are still really, really important. They're essential, but we just need them in smaller amounts. So these include our vitamins and minerals, examples such as calcium, iron, vitamin B, all I've said B12 here, but all the B vitamins, vitamin A, all of those vitamin minerals are those wonderful micronutrients, and they play a really big role in contributing to our overall well-being, development, and disease prevention, and just all the different functions within our body. So if we start off with the macronutrients, starting off looking at protein, and protein plays a number of important roles in the body, but is particularly important for maintaining muscle, supporting with tissue repair and immune system, and this maintaining muscle, which we'll talk about even more in a little bit, but just a really important piece that we really do want to support that, especially during times of going through treatment. And protein can really help play a big role in supporting maintaining that muscle. And so, looking at the whole food sources that can provide that protein, these would include things like various meats, poultry, eggs, fish, dairy, legumes, so things like beans and lentils, chickpeas, nuts, seeds, whole soy foods. So, that would be things like tofu, tempeh, edamame. So, all of these are wonderful whole food protein sources. And having a cancer diagnosis and going through treatment and recovery from treatment, these things increase somebody's protein needs. And so really encourage looking at how we can add some of that protein, to our meals and snacks throughout the day and just support when our body does need some additional protein. And we'll certainly talk through lots of ideas for how we can boost those in, but just like to highlight that here that often these protein needs are a bit elevated. So in terms of those protein sources, so there is a recommendation. So this is from World Cancer Research Fund around keeping red meat to under 2 to 3 servings per week. And servings are kind of think of like the palm of your hand can be about a serving size. So keeping that under 2 to 3 times per week. And then other protein sources include things like so leaner meats like chicken, eggs, dairy, fish. There's the note here that there is some again another recommendation just around caution with more processed meats. So that would be things like bacon, sausages, cold cuts, deli meats. And again, that from the World Cancer Research Fund around just trying to keep those as minimal as one can, and just some caution with those foods and also with the charring of meats. So often, especially in summertime, this comes up a lot about how do we do safe barbecuing practices. So that includes taking off the any charred burnt bits on the meat, trying to avoid cooking it in that direct flame. So having a little bit of lower heat or away from the flame, or even using like a marinade can also just help support kind of protecting the meat with that little bit of a layer, and reducing that direct heat contact on the meat. And then, of course, there's a variety of plant-based protein sources that are wonderful to include. So these would be things, so the legumes, the nuts, seeds, so nuts, almonds, walnuts, cashews, all the nuts there. Seeds can be things like pumpkin seeds, hemp heart seeds, flax seeds, a variety of ones there. We chatted about some of those whole soy food forms. So again, the tofu, tempeh, edamame, whole grains will contain protein. And these plant-based protein foods, in addition to providing protein, also provide added fiber and other nutrients. And it can include them in a variety of ways. So dried, canned, frozen. So thinking of things like beans, these can be both cooked from scratch, but can also be canned as a really great option. Edamame, I see often as both a frozen option can be nice. So can get them from a variety of different ways. And all of these are wonderful ways to include those foods. Right. So the next macronutrient we'll look at is fats. And so fats really is essential for so many things in the body. They play a big role in those cell membranes, a main component of our brain cells, a really important energy source for the body. And they also really help with absorption, absorption in particular of like fat soluble vitamins. So things like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. Those are all require some fat to be absorbed. Fats also play a role with our hormones, help with satiety and those hunger signals and hunger cues, insulation. So really play a number of important roles in the body. And so whole food sources include things like nuts, seeds, avocado, fatty fish, olives, olive oil, coconut. All of these are wonderful fat sources. And then just put a note here about these omega 3s and omega 6s. And so what these are a type of polyunsaturated fat. And so this is referring to the biochemical structure of where the fat bonds are. So that omega-3 is just referring to where that first double bond is in the fatty acid chain. And don't worry, it won't get into a biochemistry lecture, but just to highlight, that's what those omega-3 and omega-6s are referring to, is just that structure on the fat bond. And why there's a note about them is that we see these omega-3 rich foods as having a number of supportive health benefits. They're quite anti-inflammatory. And so really encourage including these omega-3 rich foods in the diet. And omega-6s are important as well. We definitely need both, but really like to highlight it's the ratio that's important. We want to have a greater ratio of these omega-3 rich foods if we can. So these include things like cold water fish, walnuts, flax, chia, hemp seeds, nuts. These are all really wonderful sources of omega-3s. So just trying to encourage more of those foods, whereas some of the omega-6 foods would be things like a corn oil or a safflower oil, sunflower oil. And so just trying to have more of those omega-3 category foods to support that overall ratio of these fats. And then we're looking at carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are that main source of energy for the body, the preferred fuel source for the brain. So playing a really important role with energy. And so whole food sources, there's a whole variety of carbohydrate whole food sources. So things like fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, peas, lentils. So whole grains would be things like a grain bread, a whole grain pasta, different whole grains like quinoa, whole grain rice, farro, amaranth. So a variety within that category, and really trying to encourage carbohydrates in their whole food form. So when they're in that whole food form, they contain more of that fiber, more of those nutrients, opposed to when some of these products are refined. So refined meaning we're stripping away some of that food and processing it down a bit, and it removes often a lot of the outer fiber and different vitamins and minerals that the food contains. So an example would be if we have, say, a grain product and we've got a whole grain versus a white bread and a whole grain bread. So the whole grain would be more of that grain intact. It's retaining that outer grain, it's retaining the bran and the germ, and that's where a lot of that fiber and those nutrients are. And when it's refined, it gets stripped away and we lose some of that fiber and those different nutrients in there. And so just looking for those foods that are in as much of that whole food form as possible. And we'll highlight that here again, with this emphasis on fiber. So again, carbohydrate foods provide wonderful sources of fiber. And when they're in that whole food form as much as possible, they'll retain the most of that fiber. So general recommendations for fiber are encouraging around about 25 to 38, 40 grams per day of fiber. And if you're thinking, okay, maybe I don't quite have that and I'd like to increase my fiber, we really encourage taking a slow approach. So just starting to incorporate some of those fiber foods slowly. Maybe that's adding a quarter cup of some of those lentils or beans, or certain vegetables, but just starting off slow when increasing our fiber, and then to make sure that we're also supporting that fiber with our hydration. So sipping on water continuously throughout the day and just making sure we're really taking in enough fluids to support any time we are increasing that fiber. And so you'll see here in this little picture, just highlighting what I was mentioning on the last slide about that refining process. So the whole grain bread on the right would have more of that bran and that germ intact. So it's got higher fiber, more of those B vitamins. And then the whole wheat, which I know sometimes is tricky, whole grain versus whole wheat. But there's still just a little bit more refining down of the middle one. And then our white bread would be much more refined and losing a lot of that, all that outer layer out of bran of the grain. And then we've lost a lot of that fiber and those nutrients. And just like to highlight here that sometimes there are considerations, some cancers, some symptoms may require a low fiber diet. Often temporary, some are longer term, but and often are directed by a doctor or a dietitian to relieve some symptoms and support, and then can look at bringing back in more fiber. So fiber is definitely really wonderful, but there are some scenarios where maybe we do need to pull back a little bit on the fiber. And when we talk about nutrition during treatment and some of the side effects that come up, this will come back around there. And then just the last sort of category with the carbohydrates, the fruits and vegetables, and really encourage that eating of the rainbow, or including as many of those different colors as we can. So really like to encourage that eating in color. And how do we bring in some of those different colors, those reds, orange, yellows, greens, and the different colors of these fruits and vegetables represent and highlight that the food has these different phytonutrients, so these different plant nutrients. And so the colors representing those different nutrients. So it can be really supportive to include a variety of different colors where we're able. Trying to get a minimum of 5 servings a day if we're able, spread throughout the day. And then just a note here about fresh versus frozen, and both are wonderful options. So yes, it's lovely in the summertime to get lots of fresh produce. There's so much more that's available, but frozen is a really great option as well. So with frozen foods, the fruits and vegetables are picked at peak ripeness, and then flash frozen right away, so they retain a lot of their great nutrients. So a really great option. Also often a bit more affordable with some of those frozen options, and then certainly in the winter time when maybe there's not as abundance of those fresh fruits and vegetables, frozen can be a really great option. And then in terms of different preparation approaches, we often get asked about how best to kind of prepare the fruits and vegetables. So really just encourage a variety of approaches. Some are really enjoyable eating raw, sometimes cooking, sometimes fermenting. All are great to use, and sometimes heat will maybe make some nutrients lower the amount of them, but it also might make other nutrients more bioavailable for our body to absorb. So that's why we just encourage using a variety of different cooking different serving approaches. So raw is great, cooking, fermentation also sometimes helps make things a little more digestible. So all of these are wonderful approaches to include with the fruits and vegetables. And then just another note about whole form versus smoothies and juicing. And so in our fruits and vegetables are in that whole food form, they'll again retain all that fiber, those nutrients. And then if we think about something like a whole apple, when we would go to bite it, we would have to chew it. So it's quite a slower eating process, slower digestion process versus if we blended up, if we peeled and then blended up that apple into like a smoothie, it's sort of taken the place of us chewing the food. So it just means that it will break down a little bit faster in our body. So often talk about thinking, for having something in a smoothie, and we think about what's in there, and then we think about if we were eating it in that whole form, how would that what would that time look like? Because a smoothie can be pretty easy to drink down pretty quickly. So if it is blended up, just thinking about, okay, well, if I were to eat this, maybe I can try and drink my smoothie in that same amount of time. Or even sometimes we say like chewing our smoothies, that even that act of chewing, supporting with that digestive process so that we're not just drinking a quite a bit of fluid and those blended up foods at once. And then always encourage pairing in some protein and fat with that smoothie to really balance it out. And then if we go one step further with juicing, often with juicing, if you've done it with a juicer, you'll notice it removes a lot of this pulp at the top. And a lot of that pulp has a lot of great fiber and nutrients in it. So it does mean that we'll absorb it quite quickly because we've removed a lot of that fiber. And so we'll be taking it in quite quickly, and it will have a bigger impact on our blood sugars and can have some impacts on energy. So just some considerations with those different approaches between eating something in a whole food form, which we have to do the work for chewing and breaking it down and that digestive process, and that will certainly retain all that fiber and those nutrients. Smoothies then will break it down a little bit more. We'll go through our body a bit faster, but can certainly be supportive, especially for some people if there's a lot of fatigue and low appetite. Smoothies can be a helpful way to get in some calories and nutrition. And then versus the juicing, which does break down the fruits and vegetables and removes a lot of that pulp and fiber. So just some considerations with those different approaches. And so on the note of blood sugars, which I was sort of mentioning a little bit there, so just what you can see on this graph here, so that green line would be kind of like our carbohydrate foods. And so if we're having a really something that's quite refined carbohydrate, or maybe even the juice that we mentioned on the last slide, or something like a white rice, something that's quite refined, carbohydrate will cause quite a quick rise and then a quick fall. So it would be even a steeper rise than we see here with that green line. So it causes this rise in our blood sugar levels because we take in the food, causes this increase in blood sugar levels. Our body then releases this insulin to get that glucose up into the cells, and then we see the blood sugar levels come back down. And so if we look for those carbohydrate foods that are full of that fiber in that whole food form, this rise will be much more gradual. And so that green line moderates out a little bit more. It still goes up and then it'll go back down. And then in terms of how do we support those blood sugar levels even more, if we pair those fibrous carbohydrate foods with some protein and some fats, you can see it starts to bring down this rise in the blood sugar levels more and more for that overall composition of the meal. And so this is why, and I'll speak to this a number of times throughout the presentation, but pairing our meals with those proteins and fats, with those fiber carbohydrates, really helps with this blood sugar balance and helps decrease that big rise and that fall, and is supportive for our health over the long term, and also helps with even like day-to-day energy levels. So just thinking about how we can add in some of those proteins and fats with our carbohydrate foods. And so here, this graph just shows if we were thinking of kind of a in a day version. So upon waking up, that blood sugar might be a bit low. We eat a balanced breakfast, and we'll see that rise in those blood sugar levels, and then they'll of course come back down. And so it keeps it in the kind of a very moderate range between these two black lines. And we just want to encourage that approach over if we're eating something that's quite refined or quite sugary and refined. It'll cause quite a big big spike. So a big jump up on that graph there and then a big fall. And we just want to try and support these balanced blood sugars over time with these smaller increases and smaller drops rather than having a pattern of big rises and big falls from eating some of those foods. So just thinking again about that balanced approach and how to pair in some of those proteins and fats to support with these blood sugar levels. Because if we have that pattern of quite high rises and falls over time, this can be quite inflammatory in our body. And so just taking that pairing approach, combining the balanced meal with those other macronutrients to support with those blood sugar levels. And so just a note about sugar, and I know this one always comes up. So yes, can be supportive to be mindful of those added sugars. So high sugar foods are often lower in vitamins and minerals that are really supportive for the body. And then we talked about how do we support with those blood sugars by bringing in some protein and fat. So thinking about what can we add in with maybe some of those foods that are broken down a bit faster. How do we bring in some more of that protein and fat, those servings of vegetables and fruits, that fiber piece, with that overall picture of how do we support those blood sugar levels. So we talked about the macronutrients, and then just a quick word on the micronutrients. So again, those vitamins and minerals that are really supportive for so many different things in the body. So really encourage a foods first approach with these vitamins and minerals. So can we get them from our diet? Can we get them from a variety of foods? Because when we have them in a food form, it's a much more kind of controlled amount, where sometimes in supplemental form, it can be quite a concentrated amount and can just have different impacts in the body. But we also see that so many of these wonderful nutrients, vitamins and minerals, and different nutrients in foods work really synergistically together with other foods. And so, of course, if they're in a isolated supplement form, we're not getting those same other benefits with other foods. And so, definitely, there's scenarios and instances where having supplements can be really supportive and absolutely is warranted. So if somebody was quite iron deficient, as an example, then yes, an iron supplement can be really helpful. So really encourage, if wondering about specific supplements, to have a discussion and chat through. Okay, well, would this be supportive for me? Are there any considerations to take into account? And just having a really informed conversation about having, if you are interested in a supplement. And so this is where that one-on-one support can be really helpful. All right, so if we start to think about considerations that can impact our nutrition and even beyond nutrition, like our food choices, there's so many layers to our nutrition and our foods that we eat. So access can play a really big role. Maybe we don't all have access to some specific foods, and certainly a variety of treatment related side effects can really impact both our nutrition through a variety of different ways. Maybe it's impacting hunger. So if somebody's hunger levels have shifted, that can impact the nutrition and the foods we eat. Hunger and appetite and taste. So maybe foods are tasting a bit different, which can have a big impact on what we might want to eat. Different medical conditions can impact both desire to eat as well as what might be going on in our digestive system, how we might be absorbing some foods. So this can play a role in impacting our nutrition. Emotional and mental health, these can play roles in what we maybe want to be eating, and even this link with our gut health and our emotions and mental health being quite closely linked. There's also a lot of different messages that can impact what foods we might be wondering about or going to eat. So exposure to different food messaging, whether this is from family or friends or society or the internet. There's a lot of strong messaging out there with certain foods. So there can just be a lot of differences there in terms of maybe what foods we're wondering about having and can influence those food choices. Knowledge and interest in some foods. Digestion, again, can just play a really big role. If some foods are really challenging for somebody to digest, then that could impact whether they're going to eat it again. So that can play a big role. Similarly with intolerances, allergies, different preferences, sensory considerations, and also things like stress and sleep. These can play have an impact on different like hunger hormones and satiety cues, which again can just impact that overall picture of nutrition and then treatment, like I mentioned. So just a number of considerations that can play a role with our nutrition from a variety of different angles. And so it just speaks to how individual a lot of these choices need to be for people. So we start to move a little bit into it during treatment and what nutrition, how we can support our body with nutrition during treatment. And new treatment plans can vary. So there can be some overall considerations to keep in mind, but of course there'll be individual considerations with a specific treatment plan. And so, of course, we really want to support that weight and muscle, especially during treatment. Weight and muscle can be impacted. So trying to really maintain that and maintain that muscle mass. So I'd mentioned that a little bit with protein before, and we'll certainly highlight it again here. So including foods that are really nutrient, caloric dense, and high protein to support in this area. Sometimes having small, frequent meals throughout the day can be helpful with maintaining weight and muscle. Going to eating every sort of 3.5 hours, or whatever length of time might feel supportive, but having some more smaller and more frequent meals. Sometimes nutrition supplementation can be helpful. So this may be things like an oral nutrition supplement such as like a boost or an ensure, or maybe it's like a fortified smoothie with different protein foods. So just sometimes to help with boosting those caloric and protein needs, that these nutrition supplementation can be helpful. And then of course, different side effects might come up, which are important considerations. So if somebody has low appetite, and how do we support with that? And again, looking at those small, frequent meals. If appetite's really decreased, really capitalizing maybe on when appetite is better throughout the day. Bowel changes. So if somebody's experiencing diarrhea going through treatment, maybe there needs to be some nutrition tweaks there to help with that, and vice versa with constipation. So bowel changes is something that often comes up, and nutrition can play a big role in supporting with that. And I'll speak to some specifics with that on the next slide, but just to highlight some of these different side effects that could come up that nutrition can help with. Sore mouth and throat can be another one that can be quite challenging. And so again, this hydration piece to really help with the sore mouth and throat. Also, some oral rinses can be quite supportive in that area. And sometimes medications are also needed to help with some of these different side effects that may come up. So if we look at some more sort of specific pieces of how do we help in those areas, so in terms of that maintaining that muscle mass and weight, eating a robust amount of protein-rich foods with each meal and snack can really support with that tissue healing and muscle protein turnover, especially during times like a surgery or radiation or chemotherapy, where these protein needs really are elevated. And so, really encourage trying to have consistent amounts of protein throughout the day. And so this could even be upwards of 4 to 5 to 6 times, where maybe we're having these mini meals, but with some protein foods. And this is shown to be most supportive for helping with that muscle mass when we can have it at consistent times throughout the day rather than just sort of having a lot at one meal. So trying to include it at our meals, trying to include at the snacks. And so again, the protein-rich foods, things like chicken, fish, plain Greek yogurt, eggs, beans, lentils, tofu, nuts, seeds, nut butters. These are all wonderful protein-rich foods. And so can you even giving some consideration to how these could be added to a meal and snack. And when we think back to that kind of pairing approach with adding in some of these protein foods, so maybe if we're having a piece of fruit, maybe we're adding some almond butter and peanut butter to boost a little bit of that protein and those calories at that snack. And often we think we've got protein foods, and usually at meals are pretty good, but it's sometimes the snacks where maybe this can be a bit trickier. So giving some thought to what might be some easy protein foods to add into a snack, just to boost that opportunity to get another protein food in throughout the day. And then we've got, of course, hydration can play a really supportive role. So things impacting with appetite or nausea, trying to maintain adequate hydration. So sipping on fluids throughout the day. So yes, water is certainly the main one to try and emphasize, but other things will contribute to our hydration status. Tea and soups and yogurt will help as well with that. And if we're wondering, am I getting enough fluids? Some signs of dehydration, so fatigue, dry mouth, thirst, decreased urine output, and also you can check in with like the color of the urine. So if it's starting to get quite concentrated, this could indicate maybe we need to increase that hydration a little bit and up a glass of water. Whereas we want to try and get it quite pale and light yellow. And then, of course, the digestive issues that might come up, which can be really challenging. So, an increase in gas or diarrhea might present, especially sometimes with radiation. Um, and so, in terms of how we can support if diarrhea and gas are something that are coming up, and there's different medications too that can sometimes cause this. So, this is sometimes a time where we may pull back on some of that real roughage fiber. So, of course, fiber being wonderful, but in times of a lot of diarrhea, we might pull back a little bit on that and look at how do we maybe peel some of our vegetables and fruits and cook them a little bit to just help with that digestion. Sometimes blending things up a little bit will help again break them down and support with that digestion. So a little bit of cooking, peeling, and so we can still have some of those fiber foods, but peeling them, removing a bit of that roughage fiber will help calm down the bowels a little bit. So things can like sweet potato and yams, banana. These are really great stool thickening foods that we can remove that outer peel layer, and then can help sort of thicken up some of that food when experiencing a bit, or thicken up the stool when we're experiencing some of that diarrhea. So some of those lower fiber options, but definitely an area that I find can be really supportive to chat through just how to really fine tune to support with this area. So I thought I'd provide some ideas, and I know we will have our section on putting it all together, but thought I'd talk through a few ideas for during treatment here. So sometimes bowl meals can be a nice option because we can really mix and match what's going in them. And so incorporating a variety of different foods here so they can be quite versatile. So for protein foods, as an example, this one's using chickpeas and quinoa, but you could add some cooked chicken or some fish. Looking at some supportive fats. So there's some avocado in this example. Maybe it's like a tahini dressing, or again, fish will provide some wonderful fats, or maybe we're adding some hemp hearts on top or some nuts on top. So getting some good fats in there. And then the fiber complex carbohydrates. So in this example, we've got again the quinoa, some yams, chickpeas, all providing some great fiber and some of those leafy greens. And then, of course, if we're needing to adjust for certain conditions or certain changes with our digestion, so we could swap in some white rice if we do need to pull back a little bit on that fiber. If the stools are quite loose, you could swap in that and play around with the different vegetables. So bowls can be something that can really be kind of mix and matched and different flavors too. Especially if you're experiencing taste changes, you can play around with the different sauces, or if even sort of dryness in the mouth, being able to add in some of these sauces and marinades on the bowls can be supportive, and then it just includes a variety of different foods. So just an example there. And then another example too that can be helpful during treatment. So smoothies, things that are blended, sometimes especially if that energy's impacted and appetite's impacted, smoothies can be a nice option because they're a little gentler on digestion. They'll provide some great hydration, can incorporate a variety of those plant foods, and can bring in some really great calories and protein and nutrient density in a blended beverage. So adding some protein, so this could be like some Greek yogurt, again the hemp seeds, a soy or cow's milk. Soft tofu can be a great option for blending into smoothies to really boost that protein. Almond or nuts or seed butters are great to include. Protein powder can be supportive for some people to again boost that protein in a smoothie. And then adding in different fats, so avocado or nuts and seeds, ground flax, and then again looking at those complex carbohydrates. So again, you'll see we're building out that balance, supporting with those blood sugars, getting that adequate protein, and then the complex carbs there with different fiber foods, some berries or nuts, seeds, banana. And so, especially if you're experiencing some gas and having some digestive challenges, sometimes smoothies and still drinking them slowly. So again, that emphasis on kind of like if we were eating those foods, having them slowly, chewing the smoothie as an example to still support with that digestion, but can be a little bit easier and can be just a great option when feeling a lot of fatigue. To have something like this that's easy and doesn't require a lot of energy to both prepare and to eat. And then another example, so things like soups, and then how we can really boost the nutrient and protein density of the soup. So again, a little bit gentler on digestion, can add in some things like ginger, which can often be comforting for nausea, can incorporate different plant foods into the soups, and then we'll still be hydrating. So different protein that we can bring into soup. So again, a plain Greek yogurt can blend in quite nicely. The hemp hearts, hemp seeds, soy milk, soft tofu again blends in really nicely into a lot of soups. Hemp hearts, pumpkin seeds, protein powder, chicken, fish, a variety of different protein sources that can be incorporated into soups. And then a different fat sources. So again, avocado, hemp hearts, pumpkin seeds, and then our fiber. So maybe it's a side of bread, could be a multigrain, sourdough, or some crackers. So it can be a variety to choose from. But again, we're bringing in those different macronutrients, balancing it out, and can kind of mix and match with the different foods that are going in that can help support with any taste preferences and changes like that. And then in terms of snack ideas, and so this is where really encouraging thinking of pairing with some of those protein foods at our snack because it provides that great opportunity to get a little bit more protein during the day so that we can try and get those sort of 4 to 5 to 6 opportunities throughout the day with some of those protein foods. So some examples here, like if we're having a piece of fruit, maybe we're adding some almond butter or peanut butter onto it. Maybe we're adding a side of hard-boiled egg with some fruits and veggies, or maybe a hummus dip with some crackers or some whole wheat pita or some veggies, a trail mix that has a variety of nuts and seeds in it, or maybe like a homemade sort of like an energy ball there with that has like some peanut butter or almond butter and different nuts and seeds and some dates, things like that in there. So all of these still bring in some protein and bring in a variety of foods, but can just make sure that it's still supporting your body with a little bit of protein and helping with those balanced blood sugars. And then we're looking at nutrition after treatment. So still very much that cancer protective nutrition lens, where we include those plants as a foundation and can still include, lean proteins, foods in that really whole food form. Still the encouragement around balancing those blood sugars. So pairing our meals, having that balanced approach with the three macronutrients, an emphasis on those fiber foods, and eating the rainbow. So again, the variety of colors and looking at different opportunities to bring in different colors, and also with the colors, the different families too. So thinking of like our cruciferous vegetables, broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower, and then we've got our colorful ones that contain those carotenoids. So like the carrots and the red peppers and tomatoes, our leafy greens, spinach and kale and collards. So looking at are there ways to just boost, an extra color there and a different vegetable from a different family. And again, all of these have really wonderful and different phytonutrients and plant nutrients that just work really synergistically together. So looking at opportunities to boost that color. And so when talking through, how do we kind of put it all together? And so talked about a few examples with those bowls and smoothies, but can consider the plate approach. And this is taken from Canada's Food Guide plate approach, is just sort of can be a nice visual to see, okay, are we getting kind of half that plate with our vegetables and fruits? We've got that quarter with our variety of protein sources, and then we've got our fiber foods. And you'll notice there is that key emphasis with vegetables before fruit. So when we're trying to fill that plate, trying to have really that great abundance with all of those vegetables. And of course, our meals don't necessarily look like this, but just kind of keeping in mind, okay, are we getting a variety of different vegetables and fruit here and some protein and some of that fiber? And so in terms of what this can look like in actual food examples, so like the bowl that we talked about earlier, here's another example, bringing in, it's complex carbohydrates with the sweet potatoes and fiber in the chickpeas and the quinoa and the different seeds that are in there. We've got an example here with at the bottom, another bowl that's maybe bringing in it's either some chicken or some fish or maybe tofu on top. Or maybe we're having something like a taco. So we've got that half that plate with the salad, taco, and then we can add into the filling. Maybe we're using a lean meat of some sort and adding in some beans or lentils into that filling as an example there. So just kind of giving some thought to your meals and how can add in some of those foods to create similar proportions, even though they may not look like that distinguished plate, but just how to bring in those variety of those foods. We talked about those balanced snacks. So just again to highlight, looking at those different protein options. Maybe if we're having some veggies and pita, we've got that sort of hummus dip or like the hard-boiled egg, or maybe like a Greek yogurt dip, which can be a really nice option and can bring in different flavors there. We recently did a key lime yogurt dip in one of our cooking classes, which was a really lovely option to dip some fruit into and then really high in protein. So can kind of explore different ideas to balance out those snacks and again just support that overall diet picture. And then our hydration, when we think of bringing this all together, so we know that hydration is so important. And here's that example of like with urine color that I mentioned, trying if we're hydrated, keeping it in sort of that paler range. And then if we get a bit dehydrated, it might be a bit more concentrated yellow. So just some signs to try and up that hydration and including various hydrating drinks and foods to support with that throughout the day. So when we think about all these different pieces with foods and also a lot of the different considerations that were talked about, we are all unique. And so really important to have some self-kindness around our food choices that may be most supportive for us during a particular time. Because again, we all are unique and there'll be different unique treatments and just where people are at and their experiences. And so this really impacts those different foods in terms of what might be most supportive for you. Certainly encourage that variety and that color, and working towards balance and that thought, thinking around how do we add things in rather than avoiding and restricting foods, but how can we maybe boost some of these plant-based foods? How do we add some of those nuts and seeds in or try out one of those plant-based protein foods? So how do we add in different foods rather than thinking of a restrictive approach? Talked about hydration, and we talked about this, including a variety of plant foods in your diet where able and often. And of course, other foods can still fit within there. It's just talking about this as that foundation. And then trying to include foods when they're in that whole form as much as possible to, again, really retain all that fiber and those wonderful nutrients. Fruits and vegetables, the whole grains, legumes, and then this emphasis on noticing how you're feeling. And if a food, if it doesn't feel supportive, then that's okay. There can be lots of others that can still be really supportive for you. So always kind of checking in with yourself there. So I wanted to make sure I left some time for questions. So just to sort of wrap up, provided a little intro to Inspire Health and our services here with our dietitians and exercise therapists and physicians and counselors. We chat about some of those fundamentals of nutrition and importance of nutrition, and then chatted through some of the considerations during treatment as well as with after treatment. So I'll leave some time for questions, but just to highlight some of the examples of our services, if interested in learning more about those, we do offer our individual sessions as well as group programming. So we have nutrition workshops and cooking classes, and support people are always welcome as well. So these can all be found on our website. So I'll leave it there, but thank you so much, everybody, and I would be happy to go through any questions.
Thanks so much, Ali, for the wonderful presentation. So I've got some questions that were submitted ahead of time. I think some of which you covered during the presentation, but We'll just try go through maybe the ones that
Sure.
didn't come up. Someone asked how many calories a day should one eat?
Yeah, it's always a great question, but unfortunately, the answer is it really depends. It depends on so many different factors, and this will be such a different number for each person. And there's just a lot of factors that can change what those caloric needs might be. So if you are really curious of trying to maybe just check in with are you getting enough or what maybe should be a goal for you, I would really encourage a one-on-one conversation. Unfortunately, I don't have just a stock number. There'd just be too many individual considerations for that one, but it's a great question.
Great, thank you. And someone asked, can nutrition help mitigate the harmful effects of long-term use of corticosteroids? So, in the harmful hormonal disruption causes over time. So, effect on
Yeah.
bone density and connective tissue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so nutrition definitely can support when there are some of these longer term side effects that can come up. So, yeah, with the example of like with bone density, and we certainly see this a lot with a lot of different medications and things that can really impact that. So, yes, nutrition can play a really supportive role. So, we'd be really looking at our calcium foods, trying to get those recommended dietary amounts. Just with the example there, with the impacts with bone health, so we'd want to look at those. Are we getting lots from food form? If we are falling short, sometimes that's an instance where maybe a supplement would be supportive to make sure we're in that appropriate range. So yes, when there are some of those kind of longer term potential for longer term side effects, nutrition can definitely play a role in trying to help support with those. And then depending on what those are, there'll be specific nutrition considerations for them.
Thank you. Um, Another question is, what is the role of antioxidants in lung cancer?
Yeah, great question. So certainly antioxidants are these wonderful supportive molecules that neutralize these free radicals in the body, which can cause damage. So antioxidants being generally quite supportive, but with a lot of kind of nuance thing considerations with them. So we really encourage foods with these antioxidants to absolutely include these foods. So getting them from food forms. So these would be again our fruits and vegetables, some of those wonderful whole grain, high fiber foods, to get these supportive nutrients that have those antioxidant properties. And this is where it can become a bit tricky because then sometimes there's the thought of, okay, well, if we know antioxidants are supportive, what about in supplement form? And this is where we see the research just being a little bit more mixed. And when it's in more of that concentrated amount, especially during if someone's going through like a treatment or like a chemotherapy or radiation, often we'll caution to try and just get those from a food form rather than a supplement, because it gets quite complicated in the body in terms of what exactly is going on. And in terms of with treatment, we want to give the treatment its best chance of working. So to then supplement with something in a quite a high dose amount of antioxidant could be kind of counteractive there. So there's a lot of pieces to that question. So on kind of a general level, antioxidants are supportive in the body, but really encourage getting them from food forms, opposed to kind of supplemental forms unless indicated or warranted or through a conversation with a healthcare professional.
Great, thank you. And then your thoughts on a strictly vegan diet, any advantages or disadvantages?
Yeah. So, and probably heard the kind of common theme throughout that definitely encourage plants, as a foundation. So, yes, in terms of that piece, absolutely, that's a wonderful advantage is that there's a number of plant-based foods that typically are included in that approach. However, there's a lot of considerations with that, and that's why we really talk about plants as a foundation, but doesn't need to be a strict term. So, especially it maybe if somebody's struggling even to get in enough food or struggling with their muscle and weight, and we need to really support that protein and support maintaining that muscle mass, maybe that's where it maybe isn't most supportive, and including some of those other protein foods can be really helpful for a lot of people. And we do see a bit more of an anabolic effect with muscles with some of those other protein sources, like from a yogurt, like or an animal product. So there's a lot of considerations with it, and so I really find there doesn't need to be these kind of strict labels. And of course, there's a lot of other considerations too, like environmental and ethical reasons for sure. So I'm speaking just sort of more from that kind of nutrition research lens. That doesn't have to be a strict label. We can still have plants as a foundation, which is a great advantage to have lots of those in there. But I've also seen some vegetarian and vegan diets where there's not a lot of fruits and vegetables. So I think there's just a lot of different, considerations with it, but doesn't need to be a strict label. But yes, we can still benefit from including a lot of those plant-based foods, but it can also be supportive to include things like fish and chicken for some people as well.
Okay, thank you. Um, has there been any published data on vitamins and supplements? So, for example, vitamin C, vitamin D, and their role in cancer.
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of research for sure, and there's been some really interesting trials too, which have shown mixed things. I've seen there's a really interesting trial on like lycopene from tomatoes, and then it was isolated into a supplement, and we actually saw it losing a bit of its supportive properties opposed to when people have it in food. So just to highlight an example, there's also been some really big trials that looked at like vitamin E. Um, and selenium, and some have found, like I said, mixed results. So if you're really interested in learning more about some of these supplements, there's a few resources I would encourage you to check out. So Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center has an About Herbs page, which does review like vitamin C, and you could see right there the research that has those trials that have been completed on in that particular area. So that's one resource to really see some of the research. World Cancer Research Fund also highlights a lot of course, the studies that they fund, but they fund a lot of nutrition studies, and so there are some looking at supplements there, and so they've got lots of information there. And then if you're really keen to just know what's sort of going on in trials and with supplements, there is the National Registry of Clinical Trials, and so you can sort of Google that, and then you can type in like vitamin C and lung cancer, and that'll give you all of those trials that maybe are looking into a particular area. So yeah, that was sort of a long answer to say there's definitely a lot of research and it's ongoing, and those would be some resources I'd suggest if you're interested in reading more about them.
Okay, great. See. Are there any foods that boost immunity?
Yeah, this is always such a great question. So, unfortunately, there's no like one food that will boost immunity, but definitely a lot of the foods that we talked about today provide a lot of those key nutrients that are really supportive for immune function, and they play really important roles in there. So, the different nutrients in our fruits and vegetables, vitamin C, yes, is great from foods, and we know it plays a role with immune function and zinc and things like that. So, but it really goes back to that variety, lots of different color, those fiber foods, all the combination of all these foods is what can be supportive for that immune function. And so isn't sort of one specific food, but that overall pattern, and then still that balanced approach with the protein and fiber and color at our meals and snacks is overall can help support immune function.
Mhm. And I guess just to follow up to that, if there are any herbal or Ayurvedic plants that help in healing cancer patients.
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, I kind of follow a bit with the Memorial Sloan Kettering About Herbs, and they'll talk
Mhm.
about some of those different herbs that have been researched and what information is available. I find, I definitely don't have like one thing that I would be like, yes, everybody go take this, strong recommendations like that, because there's just so many considerations with them, and often there's different contraindications too. So we might kind of read about something that's really like touted to be quite supportive, but actually if we want to make sure we look at, are there contraindications, are there any risks, are there any interactions with medications or treatment, so just a number of considerations to then make an informed decision around whether something a herb of some sort would be supportive. And then like I said, the Memorial Sloan Kettering can be a helpful database with sifting through some of that, combined with a conversation with like a healthcare provider.
Okay. I got different variations of this. I love chocolate, so is eating sugar really something to avoid in terms of nutrition?
I love chocolate too. It's amazing. So, so in terms of the whole sugar question, our cells, and I talked about in the context of blood sugar balance today, but yes, this often comes up about sugar, and there's a lot of fear-based kind of information about there. And so all of our cells do use the simplest form of sugar, which is glucose, for energy. So regular our body's normal cells and cancer cells will use that glucose for energy. And so, but it's not as simple as just cutting out sugar, because of course our body will be trying to get that energy source from other ways, and maybe that's breaking down muscle breaking down the protein, to try and get that. So that's why we talk about how do we support our body with the overall blood sugar balance. Maybe if we are having something that has a bit of sugar, we're pairing it with some protein and fat, and we're just being mindful of those added sugars so that they don't replace other more nutrient dense foods. So absolutely think that chocolate can still fit into a well-rounded and balanced diet, and maybe we're pairing it, with a few almonds on the side, and we had a kind of that well-balanced dinner. But absolutely, there can still be a place. It doesn't have to be a really sort of strict black or white, all or nothing with the sugar.